The physics of sound. I first met Julie at my school where she was a new student. When she came into the classroom, she was holding a white cane. She tapped it in front of her as she walked, making sure her path was clear. Julie was blind. At lunch, Julie sat next to me in the cafeteria. I saw that she had bought her lunch. "If you can't see your money, how can you pay the right amount for lunch?" I asked her. "My mom folds the money a certain way. Then I can tell the $1 bills from the $5 bills," she said. "I can tell different coins apart by feeling them. Quarters are big and dimes are small, and they both have ridges around the edges. Nickels have smooth edges, and they are smaller than quarters, but bigger than dimes. And if I ever drop a coin, I can tell what it is by the sound it makes. Each coin has its own sound." "I never thought about that," I said. You could tell the different coins apart by feel and by sound if you had to," Julie said. "Since I can't see, I have to pay close attention to the way things smell, feel, and sound." Julie told me that for part of each day she studied with a teacher trained to work with blind students. I learned how to use my senses to observe what goes on around me. Julie said, "Hearing is really important for me. By listening for different sounds, I can figure out where I am. My teacher calls this sound discrimination." That night, I told my mother about Julie. "Can Julie come along when we visit Aunt Carmen's horse farm tomorrow?" I asked. My mother thought it was a terrific idea, and she called Julie's mother. Julie's mom said it was all right for her to go. The next day, after school, Julie and I went to meet my mother at work. Our school is in the city, and my mother's office is just a few blocks away from it. At first, I worried about walking with Julie because she couldn't see. "Don't cross the street. There are cars coming," I blurted out when we got to the curb. "Thanks, but I can hear them in front of me," Julie said. "This is a busy street. Traffic is coming from both ways." I closed my eyes and realized that Julie was right. The sound of the cars had always been there, but I hadn't been paying attention. When the traffic light turned red, a box on the street corner began to chirp. "What's that noise?" I asked. "That sound tells me it's okay to cross," Julie said, and she headed off across the street. Soon, we reached the building where my mother worked. When we went inside, Julie walked toward the escalator. "Can we use this, or do we have to take the elevator?" she asked. "No, we can take the escalator to the second floor," I said. "But how did you know it was there?" Julie explained how she used to use sound to figure it out. "I can hear the motor running and the steps moving," she said. When we got off the escalator, we went into my mother's office. "Hi, Mrs. Hernandez," Julie said when she met my mother. "You must be copying a lot of pages on the copier." I was surprised that Julie knew so quickly what my mother was doing. "I'm just finishing a job," my mother said. "I'll be ready to go in a minute." We left the office and got into the car. Soon we were out of the city and in the suburbs. After a moment, Julie said, "There's a siren behind us. It's getting closer." My mother looked in her rearview mirror. "It's a fire engine," she said. She pulled over to the side of the street. "I hope they put out the fire before anyone else gets hurt," said Julie. When the truck passed us, my mother started driving again. We drove past rows and rows of houses. As we drove along, the houses grew farther apart. Farms appeared along the road. "We must be almost there," Julie said. "I don't hear as many cars on the road, and I think we just passed a farm tractor." My mother looked at me and smiled. Julie was right again. Finally, we pulled into my aunt's horse farm. Her dog Sadie greeted us with a bark. "I bet that dog is huge," said Julie. "I can tell by its bark. It has a low pitch, and big dogs usually have low-pitched barks." "You're right," I said. "Sadie is huge. He's a St. Bernard. Saddle is huge. He's a St. Bernard." I took Julie out to the stables so she could pet the horses. "Wait a minute." Julie stopped suddenly. "Is there a creek ahead of us?" I listened and noticed that I could hear water gurgling. "Yes," I said. "We are going to walk over a bridge to get to the stables." "Good. I don't want to get my shoes wet," Julie laughed. When we got to the stables, Julie stroked the horses on their noses. Later, my aunt came with us when we rode ponies. While we drove home, I thought about Julie and how she listened so closely to sounds. Sounds told her so much about the world. Now I'm learning to pay more attention to the sounds around me.